at Matt Baker, CFB on Twitter, joins us, National College Sports Reporter for The Athletic. In a lot of ways, we went to Matt quite a bit when there was a lot of the drama in the ACC or any kind of coverage of college sports in Florida, but now the national writer, too, joins us on 365 Sports. So, Matt, when the Ross Dellinger story came out Sunday evening, we discussed it quite a bit. We've discussed it a little bit today. And various reactions. The SEC and the Big Ten are like, okay, that sounds good, but we should even get more. And the ACC and the Big 12 are kind of like, what should we say, or do we need to remain in our place? What do you think is the reaction, or what has been the reaction around the country with what you cover with the story about when it expands to 14 or 16?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, right? Because on one hand, the Big Ten and the SEC have the power, and they deserve the power. You look at any way you want to slice it in terms of teams capable of winning national championships, teams winning national championships, brand power, attendance, admission, or TV audiences, all that stuff. It's the SEC and the Big Ten, and they're pretty comparable. And then there's a gap before everybody else, right? Florida State's a little different, and Clemson's a little different, and Notre Dame. But generally speaking, they have the power, as they probably should. But at the same time, I wonder what the real point is in all of this, right? I come back to the saying, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Does the SEC and the Big Ten really need things to be codified where they get 4 at-large bids every year? Does that hurt the enterprise as a whole? I think it might, where you start in knowing that the field is tilted in their favor. I think that's a potentially dangerous thing because, one of the reasons I love this stupid sport is on any Saturday, there's still the illusion that anything can happen, right? App State can beat Michigan. Florida State can lose to Jacksonville State. Weird stuff can happen. And that extends from one Saturday to the season as a whole, where you can have a Boise State make a run or IU or whatever it is. And we start codifying it where certain conferences have a built-in advantage, not just in prestige and money and all that. They actually have an advantage in making the playoff. I think that's a dangerous slope to go down.
Matt, I used that same phrase yesterday when we were talking about it on the show in that, there's a lot of metrics you can throw out, although some of that might be fuzzy math because of, some teams are in different conferences since the last time that happened, or also NIL in the transfer portal didn't exist. I feel like this is one of those things that we see that happens all too often where they're really concerned about something that's going to happen 5% of the time and not the other 95.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I see why they would want to protect themselves, right? For that 1 year it doesn't happen. And Alabama has a bunch of injuries, and Michigan State and Penn State have a bunch of injuries, or whatever it is, right? There are going to be situations where that happens. But most of the time, it's going to work out where this is about what it is, right? Where most years you're going to have the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have more. I just think there's a potential harm here because the real danger in this is not Alabama, losing 3 games and getting left out of the playoff. That's not the danger in this. Like, I understand that's terrible for Alabama fans and the sky is falling. I get that. The real danger, though, is if fans say, this doesn't work for me anymore. My team, whatever it is, does not have a real shot at this anymore. The powers, the separation is becoming too clear, the haves and the have-nots. I don't have a chance. My team does not have a chance because the field has gone too tilted against us. I don't care anymore. That's the danger here because we can talk about what slice of the pie the Big Ten and SEC should get. If the pie shrinks because fan bases give up, or they're not as engaged, or they're not as interested, that's the danger here. And I feel like that's something that everybody kind of has to understand. We've seen it in other sports. The rocket ship doesn't go up forever. Eventually it comes down. And if I were to come up to game scenarios where college football declines in popularity, this is one of them for sure.
Matt, how much do you think it is a risk on the part of a Jim Phillips, a Brett Yormark to push back, knowing that if they do so, that there's the alternative of, all right, well, we'll just do it without you, basically, at this point. So it was kind of a conversation we were having earlier. Like, you're going to fight for yourself, but does there reach a point where the fight's maybe not worth it? Do you see a situation like that right now where you don't know whether to take the gamble or not, or do you feel like those guys just have to be all in fighting no matter what, tooth, scratch, nail, claw, whatever, even if there is a negative backlash potentially?
What's up? We outside. Having fun doing what I want, cause you know the sun beating down kinda like a drum. Look how I do it. Look how I do it.
Another beautiful day out there, folks, so get out there, but don't forget your sunscreen, UV and
I just wanna have a good time. It's all on me. Pleasure's mine. The weatherman said it's the right time, so we gon' get it jumping till the night time. We gon' get it. We gon' get it. We gon' get it. We gon' get it. We outside. Yeah, I might just take a dive with it, feel alive with it, ride with it, cause I'm fly with it. Loud with the trouble, loud with the bass. No clouds in the way, smile on my face. Look how I do it. Look at me, look at me, look at me splash. Look at me, look at me, look at me splash. Look at me, look at me, look at me splash. Look at me, look at me splash.
So let's game that out, right? So the Big Ten and SEC want something, and the other conferences don't give in. Okay, the SEC and Big Ten are really going to have a national championship that doesn't include Florida State or Clemson or Notre Dame or North Carolina or Texas Tech or Baylor or Boise State. Like, they're really going to declare themselves the national champions with, what is that, 34 schools, I think it is? I can never remember anymore.
Right.
But like, so a quarter of the country thereabouts, that's going to decide the national champion. Like, for real? What do you get out of that? Like, I understand that people will care, but there is such a danger in declaring that we are the only teams that matter. Everyone else doesn't. I think you have to call their bluff there. And if they want to take their ball and go home, okay, take your ball and go home. The rest of us, other 100 schools or whatever it is, we're going to do our own thing, and we're going to try and do it together. I just can't imagine it working out particularly well for the SEC and Big Ten there. I understand they have the power. I understand that he who has the gold makes the rules. I get that. I just think that seems like, man, what a terrible place for college sports that would be, right? If they actually decided to do that and say, we care so much that, screw the rest of y'all, we're out of here. I just can't imagine that happening, but it's also still hard for me to imagine, the Pac-12 doesn't really exist anymore. And
Yeah.
UCLA's in the Big Ten and Texas and OU are in the SEC. Like, nothing makes sense.
No, it doesn't. And I guess, and two, it wouldn't be necessarily fight till you burn the house down, but if you fight over the AQs, for example, which I think is what everybody's talking about these last 24 hours, do you fight and you have a guaranteed 2 in hand, but you fight and then you have 1 instead of, you know what I'm saying there? Of like,
yeah, for sure.
What's the battle to wage here? Do you get satisfied with 2, or do you like to risk your chances and maybe you only end up with 1 moving forward? I guess is more where I was coming from.
I guess you can live with 2 because historically that's kind of what it's been. And again, it's really weird to like retrofit and reverse engineer playoff seedings because things have changed so much. So I'm a little hesitant to do any of that. But realistically, that probably makes the most sense. It's the danger for the Big 12 and the ACC here is you are admitting that you're second-class citizens.
Yeah,
you are. And you're also hurt if, let's say, Clemson and Florida State and Miami get their act together, right? And they do what we've all seen them do it at a high level in the past. Maybe they all 3 click at the same time, and a 10-2 Florida State gets left out with their only losses to close Clemson and Miami, right? Like, you could have that type of scenario where it would be bad, and it would be showing that again you're an inferior product. I guess that I would say if they called me for advice, which I don't know why the heck they would, but as long as there's some flexibility in the long run, I think that needs to be clear in all of this too, because the way things are right now on, what is it, February 18th, 2025, that is not the way it's going to be in 5 years, and it's not going to be this way in 10 years, and certainly not 15 or 20. Stuff changes really quickly in this sport. obviously I've covered a lot of Florida State. I've seen how quickly stuff changes. So my hope is that there would be some flexibility because everything is cyclical and things will eventually move around a little bit. And you have to be able to adjust to that.
I cannot believe you did not think of the day that Rutgers and UCLA would play a conference game against each other.
Who didn't see that coming, right?
Yeah.
It's so, again, it's all so stupid, but this is where we are.
Yeah, it is. And I agree with you on what you said because there are teams in the ACC, and that's one of the dangers the Big 12, not dangers, but one of the questions with the Big 12. K-State had a run or two in their time, Bill Snyder, Gundy at Oklahoma State. Of course, they've been on the last year where it just did not make any sense. Baylor finished 5th in the country in 21. So there are teams, Utah, there are teams that have had their runs, but you wonder, will they have enough of those teams step up and become top 10 contenders consistently? Because Clemson, Miami, and Florida State is a great example. The ACC does have that to cling to.
Yeah, those three programs have the potential. Like if we're looking at, things are changing so much, but if we're looking at how many teams can realistically think they can win a national championship, I still say it's probably in that 15 range, plus or minus a little bit. I still think Florida State and Clemson and Miami, I don't see a reason why they cannot win a national championship. But I'd have to really, again, if we're coming up with 15, 16, somewhere in there, I don't think Utah is on the list. I don't think Oklahoma State's on the list. I don't think Texas Tech and Baylor are on the list. Can they be really good? Yes, absolutely. Can they be really good consistently? Yeah, if things break the right way and you got the right coach, yes, it could happen. But can they win multiple playoff games and compete and really win a national championship? I don't know that they can. And that's the downside for the Big 12. The trade-off is that, it's a crapshoot on Saturdays where they're so competitive. And Iowa State's not much better than Colorado, which isn't much better than Kansas State, which isn't much better than BYU, right? And obviously Arizona State. They're all right there in that same kind of mix, which makes for really entertaining Saturdays, but it's hard for me to envision one of those guys making like a deep playoff run, and certainly not consistently like you could see Clemson doing again or Florida State doing.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I brought up TCU because they have had a couple of deep runs.
For sure.
Man, that natty blowout just completely negates what they did that year. I mean, it's like, if they beat Michigan, it's like, and then they got beat by 50. I hate that for them. Yeah. Matt, you had the article out last week talking about kind of the latest with the ACC and the Carolina Blue Project and North Carolina doing what we all suspected they were probably doing and kind of getting their ducks in a row and making sure they're ready for whatever pivots they might need to make. Did you take that as positive news for the ACC, as negative? Like, kind of how did you view just that being out there and it not being so much of a focus on purely Florida State's trying to get out of the ACC or Clemson's trying to get out of the ACC?
I took it as 100%. This is a really bad journalist answer. I took it as completely neutral. I'm sorry. I just did.
Okay.
I was not surprised at all. Like, this whole thing started because 11 months ago when I was at the Tampa Bay Times, I was trying to find out the legal contracts for Florida State and Clemson. I was curious about North Carolina. They were kind of a potential belle of the ball if they became a free agent, right? So I wanted to see if they were looking into this. And I had to fight with UNC, and eventually I got a legal contract. And then, again, it was not a surprise. Anybody in the ACC who isn't looking at potential realignment scenarios, landing spots, all that stuff, if they're not looking, then they're stupid.
Right.
Or it's just administrative malpractice. So, yes, of course North Carolina should look. To me, the story Brendan Marks and I wrote the other day on the Carolina Blue Matter, that was interesting because we had dollar signs, right? We had a figure, $600-something thousand over 23 months, I think it was. And they had a code name for it. And it was also a fight to kind of get that information. And it was, a code name rather than saying exactly what it was for. And even when we asked directly what it's for, they kind of hemmed and hawed. That's, to me, what made that interesting. But the actual idea of North Carolina looking around, that was completely expected. And just candidly, if the president and the chancellor and all those people at UNC were not looking at their options, then they're all really bad at their jobs and should be fired.
To follow that up, though, with Florida State and Clemson, do you feel a change in the air when it comes to the two of them and the ACC down the line, because this is kind of really going nowhere?
I mean, I think they're going to settle. I mean, I think that's long been the expectation, is that they would settle. Neither side can risk things going to court and a judge saying this, ruling for the ACC, in which case Florida State and Clemson are screwed, or for Florida State and Clemson, in which case the ACC is screwed. Neither side can risk that. So eventually they're going to settle. And right now I would expect it to settle in a way that Florida State and Clemson can stay in the ACC in a rejiggered way that allows them the possibility to make more money and to close the gap with the Big Ten and SEC if they can do X, Y, and Z, right? When is that going to happen? I don't know. Could it be today? Sure. Could it be next week? Sure. Could it be in 3 months? Yeah, why not? At some point, though, it's going to get resolved, and I think it's going to be in an awkward way where Florida State has said for months, the ACC has been steering itself to an existential brink. Okay, cool, we're happy here. We're going to kiss and make up, and we'll be here until the grant of rights expires, or we can find another way out.
I got to bring up your story, Matt. This is a great story. Are NFL players as college coaches here to stay? Deshaun Jackson, Michael Vick, of course, we've seen Deion at Jackson State, Eddie George at Tennessee State, among others. How much fun did you have with that story about telling how HBCUs are trying to get the attention and give these programs a chance to have another jolt?
It was a story that was not, one of my editors pitched it to me. And at first I was like, okay, sure. And then as I started getting into it, it was a lot more interesting than I expected it to be. I didn't think about the HBCU aspect, but, the coaches you just mentioned, and there are others too, like Terrell Buckley at Mississippi Valley. These are black coaches, and some of them have more experience than others. Some of them have almost no experience coaching. And HBCUs were founded as a way to give opportunity to black men and women who did not have other opportunities. That's what's happening here, right? I think about Deion and how hard it was for him to get a head coaching job. He didn't have other opportunities. So Jackson State gave him the job and he took off with it, right? I don't know that Virginia would have hired Michael Vick at this point because he has no experience, but Norfolk State did. So that was something that I didn't think about. And the other part of it that I really enjoyed is this guy, Rox's nickname. He was a tight end at Tennessee State, who was from Columbus, Ohio. And he was in the transfer portal when Eddie George got the Tennessee State job. And the first time Eddie George calls him, Rock just could not believe it. He said, he was stammering and stuttering through the first 5 minutes and just brimming, just so glad. Oh my God, Eddie George is talking to me. I am talking to Eddie George. He knows my name. And it's so easy in my business to get up, to get caught up in all the stuff that we're talking about with realignment and the sky is falling and all this stuff. It was so refreshing to talk to a 22, 23-year-old guy, however old he is, a 20-year-old young man who's so thrilled about the opportunity he got to play for Eddie freaking George. Yeah. And that just made me so excited to tell that part of that story, just because we all need this type of stuff, right? We all need reminders on why we love this crazy wild sport. And he gave me one, and I was appreciative of that.
Yep, good stuff. That was a great story, Matt. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Keep doing what you do.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Matt Baker, The Athletic.